information. Figured that would be best. And I am a high-functioning, physically disabled woman and cancer survivor of 15 years. And I am big into disabled advocacy, positive representation, and that's probably why Billy picked me to moderate this panel today, which is disability in romance, which so good. I'm very excited for all of my authors here today. And they are going to go ahead and introduce themselves. If you could just take a minute to say hello and maybe a little about yourself and a few of your books. Let's start with Joanna.
Hi, I'm Joanna Shu. I write historical romance set in the Gilded Age, which is the late 18th century America. So like the time of the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and the Astors. My most recent release was The Duke Gets Even at the end of January by HarperCollins Avon. And I think the book that I'm here to discuss is A Notorious Vow, which came out, I don't know, 2021, maybe 2020, 2019. What is time anymore? Yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Katie, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Katie Mendner, and I write contemporary romance, and I write for Harlequin Intrigue, so romantic suspense. My last release was actually an independent novel called Cookie, but we're here to discuss the book Going Rogue in Red Rye County, which was my first Harlequin Intrigue and the first mainstream disabled romance published by a disabled author through Harlequin.
Very cool. Congratulations. That's exciting. Anna, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I'm a little newer to the game. I'm Anna Sortino, and my debut YA contemporary romance, Give Me a Sign, just came out last month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm deaf, and this book is set at a deaf summer camp.
Very cool. Jean.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jean Meltzer. I like to say I'm the author of Unapologetically Joyous, Super Jewy, and Chronically Fabulous Rom-Coms. I write about characters like myself. I am chronically ill and chronically disabled. I prefer the word chronically disabled, though, because that's a much better descriptor of what I live with on a day-to-day basis. I've been a chronically ill patient since 1998, so I'm an oldie at this with ME/CFS, myalgic encephalitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and as of 2020, I got to become a chronic pain patient. So my first book, Matzo Ball, dealt with a character with my disease, ME/CFS, and Kissing Kosher, which is my latest book, my third book, deals with a character with chronic pelvic pain and sexual dysfunction.
I am so excited to read it. I am so excited. I've read everyone's book who's here. I'm fangirling a little right now. Let's just put it that way. All right. Ronnie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ronnie Lauren, and I've written erotic romance and I write contemporary romance. So lots of my characters have had mental health issues, but I think what we're probably talking about in this panel is some of my recent books. I had a heroine with Tourette's. My son has a tic disorder, so that was the inspiration for that. And then I also have a hero that had an amputation in a recent book called What If You and Me? So, hi.
Hi. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone who is saying hello in the chats. Thank you so much. We will have some time towards the end of the panel, probably about 10 to 15 minutes for our panelists today to answer questions from you, the audience. So feel free to pop those in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll have some questions for the panelists from all of you in just a little while. So our topic today is disabilities, which can cover any number of things. And I think we have kind of a plethora of authors today who either have experienced it themselves or have someone in their family or close to them that has a disability or many disabilities. I myself was born with lipomyxomyocele, which is a fatty mass at the base of the spine. It's a very rare spinal defect. I'm also a cancer survivor, and I was just diagnosed with vasculitis about a year ago. So I have a number of issues, disabilities, not issues. Disabilities is a better word. And so our first question, and anyone can answer, and I'm here just to kind of moderate our panelists. What inspired you to take up the mantle and write characters with disabilities? Let's start with Katie, if we want to get started.
Well, it was in 2011 that I had my left lower leg amputated after a skiing accident when I was a teenager. And I had a ton of time on my hands, of course, because it was February and it's winter in Wisconsin. What are you going to do? But what I was finding was no disabled characters in the romance genre, at least that you could find very easily, like, you know, by trying to do a search, because there was Kindle at the time, obviously. And so I just thought, all right, well, if it's not out there, then I'm going to write it. And so I sat down and wrote Sugar's Dance, which was about an amputee woman who was it was romantic suspense, but at the same time, kind of her journey through finally accepting that this wasn't the end of the world for her, and that she could go on and do many things in life that everybody else does. It was supposed to be the only book I had in me, and now here we are, all these books later. But it was very interesting once it was released how many people were actually looking for these types of books and not finding them. And so when they did find them, then they just kept emailing me wanting more.
Wonderful. Ronnie.
I keep muting myself because my dog is barking in the background. So I apologize if y'all hear random dog barks. There you go. There was one. But I was inspired with Yes and I Love You. Like I mentioned, my son has a tic disorder. He's also on the spectrum, and he's done so many things that when we were, getting diagnosis early on, we were thinking he was going to have all these, challenges, and he has, but he's overcome so much that I think he's my inspiration for a lot of things, to see that, he's worked through things. And even though he's got all this stuff, he's, so strong and all of these things. So for Yes and I Love You, with my heroine with Tourette's, that's really where I got that idea from, because the heroine's so frustrated. She wants what she wants in her life, and this thing that she's got to deal with keeps, kind of getting in her way and giving her anxiety. And I wanted to show that there were ways for her to work around that and still, embrace the things that she was going through, and that was special about her. So I have, other books that have different things, but that was the inspiration for that one. So.
Cool. Anna.
Yeah, when I first started writing, it was right kind of on the cusp of the own voices. Like, I know we don't really use that term as much. But the first novel I had written wasn't that. And I kind of realized, like, I felt like I was just regurgitating what I had read. So it was really kind of great to see the whole movement embraced. I was like, oh, like, what's something from my life that people have always had questions about? And it was like, oh, when I went to a deaf summer camp. So it was kind of getting to play around with kind of like what and just realizing, yeah, like you guys have said, like, there's so many readers out there eager for this representation, and realizing like, oh, I can write this book with this representation, with a character like me that I've never seen before. And there's people out there eager to read it.
Definitely. Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Joanna.
I was inspired to write A Notorious Vow by my husband and my husband's family. My husband's grandparents were both deaf on his mother's side. One was born deaf and the other contracted deafness through an illness in early childhood. So that was really the inspiration for me, was to sort of dig into the history. They both were at Gallaudet, which is a deaf university in I think Maryland or outside Washington, D.C. But so that's really what inspired me, was to sort of dig into the history of it, because right in the Gilded Age, a lot of deaf culture, and we start to see deaf communities forming. And so, you know, you have Edison and the advent of you know, sound recording and the telephone and things related to sound. So that for me was interesting to sort of look into the history of that.
Very cool. And Jean.
Hi. So probably like everybody on this panel, I could probably answer this one question like 15 different ways because there's so many different things that led me to that moment where I was like, I'm going to sit down and write a disabled character, whether that was my own journey of hiding my disease, whether that was not having any models growing up of seeing successful people or even any people with chronic disability. All of these things led to that moment at 40 years old for me to be like, I'm going to write this Hanukkah rom-com. Second point to that was I never thought this book would ever in a million years see the light of day. It was mainly a book I was writing for myself. And when I sat down to sort of write the first scene, I saw this girl, Rachel Rubenstein Goldblatt, the main character, and that is very much modeled after myself. She was in her apartment, she was in wrinkled pajamas, her hair was a mess, and I realized I was writing a homebound character. And because I was not worried about publishing or anything like that, I just wrote a story with a character like me who had my disease. I didn't think any more than that, then this is my joy, this is my fantasy. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but we'll see. However, going to Kiss and Kosher, I was an advocate a long time before I ever became an author, A-U-T-H-O-R. And when I sat down to write Kiss and Kosher, like I said, I developed chronic pain in 2020. I became a chronic pelvic pain patient. And I had sort of the same experience I had when I came out of the chronic disability closet in 2006, which is I would start talking to women about having chronic illness, and they would sort of lean in and whisper, me too. And so at that moment, I absolutely realized my third book, even though it's not a topic you see a lot in romance, I was like, I'm going to write about the opioid crisis, medicinal marijuana, chronic pelvic pain, and sexual dysfunction, because it's a Jean Meltzer book. And that's really what happened. It was the same sort of impetus of like, I've started something, it's had this response, I'm writing a fantasy for people like me, and that people need this story.
Wonderful. Thank you. Which sort of is a really great lead into our next topic, which is how were you received by agents, publishers, editors, people in the publishing industry who are sort of the gatekeepers for getting these books, these very important, positive, disabled, repped books that you all have written into the hands of readers who desperately need them and want them. What were your experiences with that part of it? And let's start with Ronnie this time.
So I've been in publishing since 2012. I sold my first book in 2010. So the gate was already open for me to kind of be able to play with the ideas that I want to play with. So I was lucky in that sense that I already had a publisher, already had an agent, and could kind of, whatever ideas inspired me, I could go for it and do. But I feel like currently I'm with Source Books, and I feel like they, if anything, want that more, you know, like there's such a hunger for it from readers. There was such a long time of no representation that I think the doors are very open now for that, which is a great shift from back when I started. If I would have tried to sell, you know, Yes and I Love You, or even What If You and Me back in 2012, I don't know if I would have had as open door to that kind of heroes, you know, those heroes and heroines. But also my brand has always been, I was a former therapist before I was writing, I was a therapist. So I always have characters who are battling something, you know, if it's mental health or physical health stuff, that was just part of my brand as well. So I think when I submit books, you know, with different things, it's kind of expected that that's already what my kind of books are. So I really didn't have too many issues with that. So.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. That's really heartening. Joanna.
Well, like Ronnie, I was already sort of in the publishing wheelhouse when this is book 3 of a series. And it was always, you know, these British heroines who come over to New York and end up with American tycoons. So I think that by the time we got to book 3, they trusted me to take whatever sort of plot I wanted. I think I remember explaining to my editor sort of why, I wanted to write it and why I felt, even though it's not my experience, I had both my husband read it. I had my mother-in-law, who is was a translator, for years and years. And then I also hired my own sensitivity reader to read it. So it's not like I just sort of wrote it off the cuff and submitted it. I tried to be as thoughtful as I thought it warranted before I submitted it. So yeah, again, like I was already sort of in the publishing mix.
Awesome. Thank you. Jean.
No, I really didn't have any pushback or any issues. In fact, my book, I sent it out to one agent and offered 2 days later. It sold several weeks later. So it was really, open doors. And actually my first editor, Little Known Story, she was like, make this book more chronic illness, more Jewish, go all out. And since then they've just sort of, I feel very lucky. I feel like Mira, my publisher, I don't know what I did right in the universe, but they really let me just go to town. So I keep going to town.
That's fantastic. I just have to say, really, like as an aside, my mom was raised Orthodox Jewish and she loves Christmas. And my dad is Catholic and he was raised conservative Catholic.
Does she get her Hanukkah bushes now at least?
Right. We growing up, my sister and I celebrated both Hanukkah and Christmas. And so I handed her your book after I read it and she loved it too.
Yeah.
Anyway, Katie.
I guess I'm a little bit on the majorly opposite side of everybody else here. I've been publishing since 2011, and like I said, just published with Harlequin with an actual main character disabled in 2023. The gates are closed if you don't have an agent. But if you are an Own Voices and you are a disabled author, it is very difficult to get an agent for multiple different reasons. And that is the first gate. If you can get past that gate, which most of us can't, we deal with all of the issues like simply the places that carry our books, they don't have categories for our books. We just got a disability fiction and an Own Voices category to put our books in like 2 months ago. And I've been fighting for it for over 10 years. We still don't have disabled romance, but at least we now have disability fiction, so people can kind of start to find it as they go through. There's also kind of this the gatekeepers within advertisers that don't want to take a chance on these books because there's our metrics or whatever show that this isn't going to be a well downloaded or well purchased book, but they're really missing the boat on that. And I really thought that would kind of start to change as it became more obvious that these Own Voices books and books that represent correctly and accurately, as I like to say, became more visual, but that hasn't been my experience at all. I got the publishing deal with Harlequin through a Romance Includes You Twitter pitch that they're doing now, which is they're one of the very few publishers that do any type of outreach for underrepresented communities that you don't need an agent in order to submit to. So being a disabled author who can't get an agent, who doesn't have that ability to walk through those gates, I guess I could say, it's been a struggle. I've thought about quitting many times. I'm glad I didn't, because here we are, with a six book series with Harlequin where every main character is disabled, male and female, and the covers are, point on to their disability. So I couldn't ask for anything more than what Harlequin has done as far as getting the representation out there. But I think a lot of these bigger publishers need to start considering books that are written not by own voices authors, and I still use own voices very heavily,
Mhm.
but also doing it in a way that they don't need an agent to do it. And whether it's a romance includes you situation like Harlequin does, or some type of initiative to bring in those authors who are writing excellent books, but their books are just getting buried and they're not being read and they're not getting TikToked and they're not, that type of situation. And I think that a lot of those authors like Mira and some of those bigger ones are really missing the boat on that aspect of it.
Thank you, Katie. Anna.
Yeah, it was an uphill battle in the last couple of years, especially because what I worried about in the beginning was the number of disabled characters I had in one book, and the fact that I was focusing on something like deaf pride. Like, it wasn't, I'm the only one in my school, woe is me. It was, this is my community, this is my identity. So I think in like the querying process, it was so long too, because like I got a lot of requests in the beginning. Like, I knew something with the story was working, but at the same time, no one had the same vision for it that I did. Like, it took a lot of, collaborating to see, like, all right, people want me to take it in this direction. No, they want me to take it in this direction. And then ultimately I got so lucky, like my agent was the perfect fit, like she has personal experience too. So it ended up being like the perfect thing. But then we went on submission and it kind of all started over again, where it's like, well, what if it went this way? What if it went that way? So all in all, like the amount of time it took was unfortunate, but I think it got to the right people in the end who kind of matched my vision for it. And I kind of wouldn't have wanted to go on so many of those alternative paths that were presented to me. But it's great now too, like with writing my second book, it feels so much more streamlined. Like I've got the agent, it's with the same editor, they know what I'm trying to achieve with these stories. And I kind of felt like I was able to just kind of like full steam ahead with the second book with the story I wanted to tell.
I really like that. It does feel like a lot of books with disabled characters and disabled main characters. It's like a lone horse sort of situation, lone wolf, where they're the only one in their school or their job or their community and overcoming the odds. And that is a horse that needs to stop being beaten, I think. So thank you. Thank you for that. Our next kind of topic, and that's a great lead in to it. It sounds like a lot of you have written your books because you have people in your life or you yourself have experienced disabilities. And so while you were writing your characters, I'm not sure if we've all heard of the Kenny Freeze test. Has everyone heard of that? Yeah, no, no. Okay, so Kenny Freeze is an American author and poet and disabled queer person, and he created a test, I want to say back in the late 90s, early aughts, that Nicola Griffith introduced me to, and it's basically like the Bechdel test for women in movies. And it's so the disabled character can't be cured or killed. They can't be a side character, and there has to be more than one disabled character. That's basically the test. So I'm wondering if any of you sort of followed something like that while you were writing your book. What kind of Joanna mentioned sensitivity readers. So did you have sensitivity readers? Who did you talk to maybe like even if you already knew a lot about the disability, did you talk to someone else? Did you talk to other people? Who did you reach out to? What kind of I won't say tests or like form did you follow, but was there something that sort of helps the story along outside of your lived experiences? There we go. That's the question. And let's start with Joanna, since you mentioned you had sensitivity readers and you've done a lot of research.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time with my mother-in-law, both of her parents are now deceased. So it was a lot of talking to her, talking to my husband, learning about the deaf culture. I think I, you know, I learned there's no one way, there's not every deaf person wants to sign, not every deaf person wants to use their voice, not every, so for me, it was just learning the variation of it, learning the history of how they were treated by the larger society in the late 19th century America. So yeah, for me, it was a lot of exploration of reading, of and just talking to my mother-in-law, really.
Wonderful. That sounds fascinating too. To kind of explore that as also as like a family history sort of exploration. Anna.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that, especially like portraying the community, that I got as many readers as I could, just like from my own life. My sibling is also deaf, so like was my first reader right there. But then even at like the final publication stage, I was like, okay, get someone outside my bubble, someone I don't know who maybe lives across the country, different deaf community. Let's make sure that my experience can like extrapolate across the country here. But I really want to make sure, even though I'm writing from my own experience, to have readers, just because like, what if I learn something too? Like, you never know like what somebody else's experience can bring to the table in a very positive way, which is why I love reading just all sorts of, crip literature and stuff like that, to see what other disabled writers are putting out there, because it can only help like color the experiences we put on the page.
Wonderful. Ronnie.
So I'm a research nerd, first of all. So even if I have personal experience with the topic, I'm going to dive like really deep into it. Like with the Tourette's, I really wanted to make sure that Tourette's is only portrayed in movies as a joke. In the past, if you look through, anytime it shows up in a movie, it's always played for a laugh. So I wanted to make sure that I portrayed it in a way that wasn't the stereotypical, view of how people think of Tourette's. So I did lots of research into the different levels of it, even though, like I said, my son has tic disorder, so I have a version of it that I've personally experienced. And then you asked about the characters, if there's, the lone wolf kind of thing. So I don't know if I would go in doing it on purpose, but my hero and heroine are always each struggling with their own thing. So with my hero that had the amputation, he's dealing with depression. He's lost his job. He was a firefighter, so he's got this mental health issue. The heroine has PTSD and chronic anxiety. She's very afraid of men. So that's her issue that she's going with. Then my heroine with Tourette's, the hero in that one has ADHD, and he's had a lot of trouble in his career because of it. So I feel like the lone wolf thing just naturally doesn't show up in my books, because I think I need my characters both kind of, being real and having their own layers, and not having some perfect, fantasy person trying to help or save somebody else, so they both are going to help each other, and grow together. So
I love that. I really do. That makes me really happy, because often not super great tropes are written about saving a disabled character, and that's like, we don't need saving. Sometimes we need insurance to help us out a bit, but that's a whole different conversation for another time. Jean.
Yes, so it's interesting. I mentioned I was an advocate long before I was an author, which meant I was working with ME Action. I was doing visibility actions in Washington, D.C. I was meeting with members of Congress and Senate. I wrote lots and lots and lots of letters that I only ever got one response to. And on top of that, I ran lots and lots of groups. So I felt very confident about speaking, especially from MECFS. I've been a part of the chronic illness and chronic disability community for a very long time. I think I had sort of an interesting, because my disability is invisible, so much of my task is making that visible and getting people to understand that when my character is going through their day and I'm describing that day, sometimes it just is, it's not depressing, right? It just is. For me, I've been sick longer than I've been healthy. I've been sick my entire adult life. This is my normal, and I'm happy with my normal. Was it a different life than I once expected? Yes, but I'm okay. Things worked out. I think the other thing, it's interesting you talk about the tests or sensitivity readers, about having a separate disabled, character. I wouldn't do it with chronic illness because I think for me, because there's been so much damage done through the misunderstanding of chronic disability, for me, I feel like if I was just going to mention lupus or RA, and it was just going to be a line or two in a book and the character was going to exist totally normally, that would be a disservice to the millions and millions of people who live with these diseases. So for me, I think where I fight the hardest and where I fight the most, beyond just trying to write a really real book about what my day-to-day or what this day-to-day looks like, is especially in the publicity aspect, making sure my facts are correct, making sure I know what I'm going to say, making sure I'm advocating, making sure I'm not doing any more damage, because there has already been so much damage done to chronically ill people and chronic pain patients.
Absolutely. Thank you for that work. That's really imperative. And finally, Katie.
Well, I was a cheater. I worked as a medical transcriptionist for 12 years. So I got a lot of stories, but I worked for specialists. So I followed a lot of these patients and their, whatever their condition was, for years and years and years. And so while I wasn't necessarily using their story, it did give me a lot of insight into what those diseases entail, what the treatments are, that sort of thing. And I never really pulled from that until I would get a request from a reader, and I get a lot of emails from readers saying, I love this book. Would you consider writing, what I have? And they tell me their story. And sometimes I can do it, and sometimes I'm like, no, just because I don't feel comfortable knowing enough about it to even sit down and think about writing it. Because my books are always written in a way that the main character is disabled, whether it's a chronic illness, whether it's a physical disability, whatever it is, but it's just, like Jean said, part of their day. It's not who they are. It is who they are in the respect that it defines them because they've always had the disability, and so they've always lived that way. But it's not like, the Me Before You, which is, don't even get me started, but it's not that type of setting where they're, sad and depressed and they're never going to find love. It's just part of who they are as they're moving about their life. So as far as sensitivity readers go, if I'm writing something a condition that I don't have, or that I don't have a direct source for, I usually reach back out to the reader who suggested it, and I asked them, will you read this? Will you tell me what I need to fix, what I need to change, what I got wrong? And I use them as my sensitivity reader, because what better person is there than somebody who's living it and can say yes, no, absolutely not. And so, and some of the conditions that my characters have are not very common, that you don't hear about, like Jean, that maybe they're a RA, or it's a hidden disability. So it's difficult to find a sensitivity reader that can read it and tell me if it's really accurate or not. So, and a lot of times I do try to steer away from writing that storyline if I know that I can't find someone that can tell me if I've hit the nail on the head or not. So that's how I do it.
Thanks, Katie. That must have been an interesting job.
It was extremely interesting.
All right, our final question before we turn it over to the audience. How do all of you think the book industry, just in general, we've sort of covered this already, but specifically romance publishing and the community, how do you think we can all improve our not understanding, but our representation of disabilities? Is there something specific you have in mind, just that you want to say to our audience today, about how they can maybe lobby, or the publishers This is a safe space, but also if you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer. But how do you think the romance industry can improve disabled representation, books about disabilities? Where do you think that stands? Let's start with Anna.
Yeah, maybe this is coming from the YA side a little bit, but I've noticed something interesting when it comes to readers, and this might be more like educators or whatever, but I've gotten some notes that are saying like, oh, I loved how much I learned in this story. I didn't really need the romance. And I go, but the romance is the whole heart of it. Like, it's one thing to, learn about a certain disability, to learn how the community exists, but like at the same time, we need disabled love stories. We need to prove that anybody's worthy of love.
Yes. One of my hottest selling books about disability is A Quick and Easy Guide to Sex and Disabilities, because people with disabilities have sex and we fall in love. And that's a really important thing for, I think, people outside our communities to know. All right, Ronnie.
So I think some of the things that we've heard in this panel, like you were saying, Katie, with the open call from the publishers to kind of let people skip the agenting process, I think that's a great thing I hadn't heard about. And I think that, could open up the doors to a lot of people, because it is a lot of steps, to get through agents and finding the right agent and finding the right publisher and all of that. And then publishers at the end of the day are most concerned about if a book sells and money. So I think readers, if you're out there and you love these books, you promote them, if you can, take pictures on your social media and go out and, tell other people about them and go to your bookstores and buy them, because, as much as we hate to think it, the publishers are a business, and that's, if they see numbers going up in those areas, they're going to want more of it. And that's why I think we've seen somewhat of a shift, is because readers have demanded, like, hey, we want this, we're reading this, we love this. And if publishers see that, then they're definitely going to want to put more on the shelf. So it's not the perfect answer. I wish the world was different in that way, but that, that is part of it. So
it's true. We do live in a capitalist society, so money speaks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I believe Billy put a link for all of your books. I created a bookshop list with everyone's books who is on this panel today. All right, Jean.
Yeah, I mean, I think those were both perfect, great comments. I mean, I love the idea of like a romance includes you. I think readers going out there, taking pictures, leaving reviews. I'll go even further. I think it's really important when these people, the publishing industry, publicity, there's always lists, there's book club picks, whatever. I mean, it disheartens me a little. I always try to look to the bright things of the world, but as we say, for Lashem Shemayim, for the sake of heaven, I'm going to say it. It'd be nice to see some books that are a little bit more on the outfield, right? So a book with a clearly disabled bent. I write stories that have an intersectionality of identity. I believe I will. Sorry, GMA. I'm sure you will never pick me as a book club pick as a Jewish disabled book, right? That's right. Maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, somebody else. I want to see a world where that happens, but I think that's what I'd like to see. I'd like publicity. I'd like every time someone puts a list out that they make sure that it's diverse, that there's a disabled character, that bookstagrammers are making sure that their feed is not filled with the same type of story. That's what we need. So the Shem Shemayim, for the sake of Hagman, I am saying it.
Thank you, Jean. That's a really wonderful answer. I agree. Katie.
Yeah, I agree with all of you. There just has to be more. I mean, the representation is there. It just needs to be more visual. We need the readers who are reading it to talk about it. We need the big authors that are published with some of these houses to go to their editors and their marketing department and say, these, I've read this, I've heard this, I've seen this. Have you? What can we do to include more of these books in our catalog? Until that's being done, or we get more disabled authors writing for these bigger publishing houses, their thumb will be on us, and we won't be able to get out from under it. And it doesn't matter if we have agents working for us, we have editors working for us, we still always have to advocate for ourselves and our writing, because in the end, we're on the backside, but we know we have readers that are reading these books. And so if those readers start speaking up more and saying, yeah, this is what we love. Like when I published Going Rogue and Red Right, they're all waiting for the second book and they're like, what, it's going to be February. Because they're just so happy to see that type of representation in the mainstream. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And Joanna, anything to add to all these awesome answers?
Yeah, I mean, read and amplify, read and amplify. That's what we can all do, and hopefully what readers can do. The other thing that I would add is educating readers and encouraging readers to pre-order books, because those are the numbers that I think publishers really watch. They really pay attention to, and pre-ordering those numbers determine how much marketing you're going to get and what kind of attention you're going to get from bookstores. And I mean, those numbers mean a lot. And I think we're getting away from pre-ordering right now, because it feels like, with the rise of KU and Amazon and everything else, there's just I want it now, give it to me now, and I think we're losing sort of the education of why pre-ordering is so important. So I just would encourage, anyone who knows readers, who's doing, if you're doing book clubs, if you're talking to large groups of readers, to really explain the value of pre-ordering and help them understand why that's so important, especially for books like these.
Definitely. Absolutely. And you never know who you might encounter when you wander into an indie bookstore or even a Barnes and Noble. What that bookseller, I look very disabled. I am obviously a disabled person, but you never know, maybe the bookseller has an invisible disability, or it's a mental disability, or you just don't know. And you go in and talk with them and maybe say, I really loved, Katie Metner's book, or Anna's book, or any of the authors here and many others besides. And you never know what you're going to get back from that person who's maybe read them all as well and has other options, or knows about forthcoming books for pre-order, as Joanna mentioned. Yeah, that's all very important. All right, we are perfectly on time. I can't believe this, friends. How wonderful. So now we have some time for questions from our audience. We have 5 in the Q&A, and so we'll start there. But please, if any of you attending have questions for our authors today, please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll get started. From Carrie Butler, if there was one stereotype you could rid the book world of in terms of portraying characters with disabilities, what would it be? I'm gonna let someone take this and run.
I'll take this if no one else wants to jump in. I called it the poor pitiful pearl. Can we please get rid of the poor pitiful pearl? If we could just, let readers understand that even if we're disabled, we don't live any differently than they do. We do, in respect, but like, we still put our pants on, one leg at a time. I just put mine on and then put my leg on afterwards. But if we could get rid of that stereotype of we either need to be cured or killed, then I think we would be on the right road with own voices and proper representation of disability in fiction.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts about something they'd like to see or not experience again in a book? Nope. Okay. Our next question from Shanna. Do you feel like publishers feel more comfortable with neurodivergent characters versus chronic illness / pain, physical disabilities, etc., and use that to check the diversity box? Jean, you want to take this one? I feel like this might be in your house.
Look at him. I've never even thought about that. Wow. I wonder if it's because a lot of writers become writers because it's a career that feels somewhat stationary. And even though it's not, and it's sort of individual, right? When you're writing a book versus like going into film and television, So I wonder if it's more a question of the writers themselves feel comfortable. Maybe there's more neurodivergent authors and they feel more comfortable writing neurodivergence. I mean, the truth is, like, my chronic disability, I am very, very disabled. I don't know how I do what I do on a daily basis right now. So I imagine it's very hard to find people who are chronically disabled who can write as a career and still manage like the rest of life. I'm able to do this because I made choices in my life where I was basically, you know, I don't have kids, I don't have a job. My husband is my primary caregiver. So for me, I was able to write books, right? But most people who are chronically ill and disabled don't have that luxury. So I think maybe it's just a question of people are maybe more nervous. If we're going to look on the bright side, maybe people are just more nervous, as people were saying in the panel, to write something that's outside their own experience, than that they haven't necessarily, than that it's easier to sell a neurodivergent character. But it's a possibility. I've never honestly thought about it, and maybe some of you have been writing disability longer, can talk more about it, and Annie, you're a bookseller, so you would know probably yourself, right, better.
It's so much, sorry, do you want to go ahead?
No, go for it, Katie.
I don't know
Please.
if it's so much that it's like to check the box, but I do think, if at least the experience of what I've read and seen, is that books with neurodivergent characters have more, you can do fantasy, you can do all these different things that you can't do. Like, you know, I struggle when I write intrigues. I have to always think about what is a character's disability and can they do this? Can they go through the woods running, you know, skipping, hopping, jumping? And you don't necessarily always have those limitations that you do with physical disabilities or chronic disabilities that you have with neurodivergence. So I think that's part of it, and why you see many more written, because also, you know, the sci-fi aspect, the fantasy aspect of it. So I don't know that it's necessarily to check a box. I agree with you, Jean. I think that it's a big part of who is actually writing them as well. So I think it's a multi-factor situation.
I will say, as a physically disabled person, I am mobile. I wear leg braces. I have pelvic floor neuropathy, so sex for me is a really interesting, sometimes icky experience. The first time I ever had sex was awful because I didn't realize what was going to happen, and the guy didn't either, and it was not a romance moment for me. When I thought it would be. And I'm very lucky that my husband is wonderful about it, but that's another thing that's addressed in A Quick and Easy Guide to Sex and Disability is sex in romance novels is very, as you all know, and I read a lot of romance, it's sort of glorified a bit as this perfect thing and this perfect moment. And I think for a lot of physically disabled people, that's not actually how it goes. So, myself included, and I know that's sharing a lot about myself. We're gonna move on from this question because we have a few more to address before we are out of time. I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. Betsy would like to know how you handle gaslighting. Anyone want to take that? Has anyone had a gaslighting experience?
I guess I need clarification on that.
Well, we all know the definition of
Right, but like gaslighting by who? Readers, publishers?
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll come back to that one then, since it's not super clear. Maybe just experience with pushback or people who oh, Betsy in the chat has said doctors, family, media. Anyone want to talk about that? I mean,
if you have a disability, you've had those experiences. That's just,
I was gonna say,
I mean, how many of us could sit here and like write a list on the whiteboard? That's just part of it.
Yeah,
it just becomes background noise. Because if you're advocating for yourself and you know that you need something, you're just going to say, okay, you're gone, next.
I will say that I do think there are some readers who, perhaps because the experience that they're reading in the book is not their experience, they don't really believe it. So they
That too.
will often, yeah, like often leave reviews like, this can't be true, or this didn't happen, or this isn't, so maybe that's what she's referring to, but I have definitely seen that happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would
Are-
agree. Sorry, I was just gonna
sorry,
say, I
no,
would
go
agree.
ahead.
I would agree with that. I have anxiety and have written characters with anxiety, and then I have had some reviewers say like, this is not what anxiety is like. And I'm like, kind of wrote exactly what my personal experience is, like, but yeah, so
Forget
I've
that there's
definitely,
humans behind these books that are being written. They forget that there's humans writing these books and that everyone has different experiences, and they can't see past their own to realize that, this could actually be that person's experience.
Mhm.
And I would also add too, like that, I write romantic comedies. And so one of the things, especially even in advocacy, or the first time I got to sit in a room with other MECFS people and talk about our experiences, was that there's a lot of like humor, right, in chronic illness. There's a lot of humor in disability. And when you're with other disabled people, there's like, you can talk about these things. So I think like in terms of that too, like sometimes not everything has to be so serious, like, in the matzo ball, there's a bedazzled wheelchair, and it's because I want a bedazzled wheelchair, right? And this was my chronic illness fantasy. So, there can be humor in these stories too, and that, it's not, disability doesn't look one way. I think we're all agreeing with that.
So true. Once my husband and I got comfortable with how sex works for me, he was like, after one particular horrible moment, he was like, people pay for this, right? It was the perfect thing to say at that moment. He made me cry. I was laughing so hard. He's a really great guy.
That's exactly it. Like that's that,
Right.
and those should be in our books, and we should be able to write those things, right? Because that's exactly it. We're all sitting here and like smiling because we all know, like, if you're disabled, you know what we're all talking about here. So,
Yeah.
we should be allowed to tell that, and like people not be, people should be open to experiences outside their own.
Exactly. We have 10 questions now to get through. And so, and I think probably we'll get to 2, maybe 3 more. Oh, Stella has a really good one. Are there any upcoming books that we should pre-order? Do libraries' purchase requests count towards those? Anyone have any books that they're excited for that are forthcoming that have disabled representation? Doesn't have to be romance necessarily, but
My book.
panel, so let's do that.
My next 2 books are up for pre-order, The Perfect Witness and The Red River Slayer, both disabled veterans. So they're up for pre-order right now. They release in February and March of 2024. Can't believe I'm saying that already.
Really
So
just put up, we can go a little bit over. So if you all are fine with that, if you don't have anywhere you have to be, we can go a little over to answer all the questions. Sorry to cut you off, Kate. Yeah, do any of you have forthcoming books that we should all pre-order? Let's go there.
I'll just Kissing Kosher. It's coming out in 10 days. It is, yeah, I know, I'm so excited. It is, like I said, it deals with chronic pelvic pain and chronic, I would say, emotional pain, intergenerational trauma, and sexual dysfunction. It's a book I'm really proud of. So go get it. It starred review from Kirkus, unbelievable, and book list. So please enjoy it.
Yay
Right
for
when you're done
Kate.
reading it.
Yay for everyone who has books coming out, and that includes anyone in the audience. If you have a book forthcoming, congratulations. Yeah, who else has, yeah, Anna.
Yeah, there's not pre-order links yet, but we'll have a cover reveal and pre-order links hopefully within the next month or so. But my next book, On the Bright Side, is a dual POV YA romance with a character who's deaf and a character who's diagnosed with MS. And this one is so close to my heart because while I was in the publication process for Give Me a Sign, I had a terrible relapse and was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So then it was kind of a question that I wanted to grapple with in the second book of like, well, being deaf is so clear of like, there's a pride component. But what if you get a disability that's, you know, pain, that where's the pride? But I was able to kind of grapple with it, put it on the page, and I really love how the characters all figured it out. So on the bright side, summer 24.
Wonderful. Joanna?
My next book is not coming out till next year. So read everyone in this panel. That's where you should start.
Yeah, agreed. Ronnie?
Same as Joanna. I am in writer's block, so I have nothing coming out right now.
Oh, that's the worst. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
My condolences. All right, so we have a question from Alana, and I'm not sure oh no, well, it's science fiction, so it doesn't really fit in this panel. But maybe. So from Alana, we've talked a little about finding an agent to help advocate for your writing with publishers, but what are other supports that you leverage on a daily, weekly basis that you leverage as creative individuals trying to make a living on writing? Who's got an answer for that? Anyone?
A writers group.
Oh,
I was
that's-
really
that's-
lucky. Yeah, when I got started, Pitch Wars was still around. And so I have a great group of writers. We're all going through the journey together. And just having any random question, whether it's about craft or publication itself, to have your small like core group that can be your go-to. Either they know the answers or they know someone who does know the answers, and that's super helpful.
I will put in there as a bookseller, if you're an indie published or small press author, and you want to pitch to an independent bookstore, which is really important, and most of us really love that. Just make sure you are doing your research about the bookstore before you pitch to them. I run a feminist activist genre bookstore, which means 95% of my stock is written by not cishet white dudes in like sci-fi, fantasy, and mystery, which are largely dominated by cishet white dudes. And so I get a lot of pitches that are books that wouldn't fit at all. And then I get grumpy people who, so that's some advice for authors who are maybe in the audience and attending today. Just do your research about, oh, thanks, Billy. Let's move on to, unless someone has something else to add to that.
I'll add one. I would just say some good emotional advice here. Don't tie your worth into a book. Write it for you first. You know, don't make it like this is where my worth and my value is. And I would say, at least if you're chronically ill, chronically disabled, always have at least one person who's going to tell you it's time to get into bed. I'm a very type A. You can be chronically disabled and type A. And my husband is great at being like, you've done way too much, you need to get into bed. So I'll have one person, a best friend, a meme on your phone, whatever, get into bed when you've done enough for the day, but don't tie your worth into the book.
That is really, really great advice. Absolutely. We all need rest. We all need self-care. Yeah. Thank you, Jane. Our next question is from Emily. If we are interested in becoming a sensitivity reader, how do we go about that?
I found mine on Twitter, which I guess is no longer a thing now. Thanks, Elon. It's now called X or whatever it's called.
Right.
That is where I found mine. But he was, I think he had done another deaf romance, and so through that, him talking about that, then that's how I knew how to find him. So I don't know how you get started other than just hanging a shingle out and, you know, metaphorically, and letting people know that you're willing to do it. And maybe you go to some of the writers groups, or yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
would,
what I think.
I would suggest some of the Facebook writer groups, like Joanna was saying, there's always people in there looking, asking, do you know anyone, a sensitivity reader for XYZ? So those are options too. You can hang out your shingle, so to say, and let people know that you're available to read. You know, be very specific what your sensitivity angle is, what your genres are, and then through that you'll get writers that will use you, and then that's how, you know, your name will kind of spread through the community that way.
Yeah, you could also reach out to other sensitivity readers. So people that are already doing it, you can, you know, the writing community is generally pretty friendly. So if you reach out and say, did you have any kind of training, or do you suggest you know, how do I learn to do this better? You know, because you might find a mentor out there. So don't be afraid to send that email. If they don't want to answer that, they won't answer. So.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. We have a question from Grace that I think is more for publishers, but we're gonna put it out there. Can I get any in large print? My 94-year-old mom can't use an e-reader. So do any of you have your books in large print? Do we know that? Yeah. Yes. Okay.
I probably did at one time, but the print shelf life is small. That window, you know, things, they just don't stay in print forever, at least in my in my career. So yeah.
Yeah, it was something I really pushed for because my book also has vision loss. And I was just really lucky that the large print publisher was like, oh yeah, we want to take this one on. So that'll be in large print soon.
Very cool.
And Harlequin always does large print for their category books. So you may have to go onto Harlequin's website in order to order them, but they do always have large print for their category romances.
Wonderful. Our next question, and we have a few more coming, and Billy, you just let me know when we want to let our wonderful panelists go, but we'll keep answering questions for a little while longer. What is your opinion on non-disabled actors playing disabled roles in media? How can we shift the narrative to open doors for more disabled performers? That's not exactly romance or book related, but it is a really important topic. So if someone has a quick answer for that and wants to do a quick answer, sure, go Katie.
I can do a very quick answer. I watched the only Hallmark type romance movie with the main character in a wheelchair, and she was a disabled, actual disabled actress, and it was never once addressed what her disability was other than she was in a wheelchair. And so not only do we have to get disabled characters being played by disabled actors and actresses, but we actually need to address the fact that they're disabled on the screen. Until we start doing that, it really doesn't matter. It's, you know, until we actually address the fact that she has a spinal cord tumor or whatever it may be, it doesn't matter who's playing the part.
Fantastic. Yes, agreed. And whoever, not whoever, I know who wrote that comment. Thank you, Samantha, for bringing that up. That is a really important topic for another time. Since today we're focusing on books and romance specifically. From Monica, I hate reading because as a part of my Dravet syndrome, I don't remember well what I read or comprehend. Any thoughts? I love to write, and there should be a book about Dravet syndrome. Maybe someone can help write about this. So do you have any of you heard from readers who have something like Dravet syndrome or Dravet syndrome that do want to read your books but struggle with reading? Have any of you experienced outreach like that? That's how I'm going to sort of form that question, Monica. I hope that's all right.
So I'll actually jump in and go first, because years before I sat down and wrote the Matzo Ball, I said in the Harlequins writer group, I'd love to see a book written about somebody with ME/CFS. Somebody out there should write it. And it was only years later where I was like, well, no one's going to write this book, right? Maybe, I guess I'll do it. So first thing I would say is don't give up on yourself yet. Because I'm chronically disabled, I have trouble reading. I have trouble remembering. I have brain fog every single day. I have lots of systems in place to help me write my books. And I do think some books are easier when you're brain foggy than others to read. But I would just say don't give up on yourself yet. I would just say don't give up on yourself. You never know where you'll be 5 years from now.
Very true.
I've had a couple of people with traumatic brain injuries that have come to me and asked if I've had other ways for them to read my book, whether it's audiobook. Some actually prefer to listen to the Kindle version of the book in that monotone computer voice, because that is how that they can, takes everything else away and they can just concentrate on the story. And so sometimes it's finding your format, and if you have to use a certain device in order to get that, there is help out there to get those. But sometimes that's what it comes down to, is finding that right format for you that you can then take in and remember what you're reading or what you're listening to.
That is I didn't know you could do that. That's very cool. And someone, Andrea said, I listen to Kindle ebooks through text to speech all the time. And so that might be something to try, Monica. I hope that helps a bit. And our final question, before we finish up, for moderators, sorry, my kid is in the back trying to whisper, and we know that 7-year-old whispering is not the same as whispering. For moderators, missed most of this panel. How can I watch the recording later? I think Billy answered that. And then there was a question about virtual book groups, virtual romance book group. I believe, Lorelei, that if you look at our authors' websites, they will have information on how to get in contact with them for visits, virtual visits, and possibly even to request a visit at your bookstore. You can also go to your indie bookstore and say, hey, I really love Anna, Joanna, Ronnie, Jean, and Katie, and I want them to come visit your bookstore. Can you do that? And then they will probably very politely say, well, I have no idea, or maybe. Since Billy put it in the chat, I am also an author. I have 2 published books. One is a chapbook with Microcosm called My Tropey Life: How Pop Culture Stereotypes Affect Disabled Lives. That one may answer the question about actors playing disabled roles. I touch on that a little in there. And a sci-fi novella called Nebula Vibrations with Vervolta Publishing that is sort of my answer to how disabilities find their way to the future. And coming this October, Soul Jar, 31 Fantastical Tales by Disabled Authors. It's a sci-fi fantasy anthology written by disabled people that sort of is, again, an answer to how you find your way to the future or a magical land where disabled could be healed or magically cured. That's forthcoming from Forest Avenue Press. So pre-order, Laura would love that. And I was trying not to toot my own horn, but Billy basically put it in there. Anyway, I want to say thank you so very much to our authors today. Thank you so much, everyone who attended. Thank you, Billy, for setting this up. Thank you to all of the attendees, to everyone who came. Thank you for listening to everyone discuss their books and disabilities and romance and how that all can and should and definitely does go together in the book world and the publishing world.
And thank you for the awesome moderating.
Thank you for putting this all together, because we all know it was a lot of work.
Thank you.
Billy was really the one who did all the work. So let's give a big hand
Thank
to
you,
Billy.
Billy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who attended. And as Billy said, there will be a virtual link for this discussion sometime in the next week.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.